we're doing a bit of standing thing now, so.
And maybe get into an interpretive dance of some sort?
Yeah. I'm a Welshman, so I can sing and dance, to be frank with you. My name is Andrew Clayton. I'm from Tribe CX. Kashmera, lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
And you're the former VP of Strategy and Innovation at Interac. And really what we can talk about in the next half an hour is about how we employ strategies to increase market share in a VUCA world. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. I'm sure you all in financial services know it's a challenging environment we operate in. So how to really plan and execute in that environment to deliver growth and market share. Oh, we got some chairs. Oh, it's even better.
I think we may have scared them when I said we were going to do an interpretive dance, and that's why the chairs showed up.
Yeah.
I at some point, I promise, like I've tried to do this with my team so many times, and everybody just looks at me like, just stop, Cash. But I'm like, one day, one job, I'm going to get my team to do a flash mob. It'll be years later, nobody even know what a flash mob is, but I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to do it eventually. But let me introduce myself.
Yeah,
So Kashmera Self, all of you can call me Cash, which I know is really funny because I formerly worked at Interac, which is a payments company. Most of my experience for the last 20 years has been all the way from corporate strategy to product commercialization and delivery. I'm one of those people that does 0 to 1 really well. I'm not an operator. I don't enjoy doing that. But the reason why I do 0 to 1 really well is because I figure out how to bring together different entities and actually understand what value looks like and make sure that I'm able to deliver that effectively. And I did that in my role most recently at Interac. I'm also a board director and an advisor, and I do that in that capacity. And I think the most important is in my mentorship role. I mentor a number of students and people that are early on in their career, and making sure that they understand if you want to be successful, you need to figure out how you're going to deliver value to the various people that you're serving.
Cool. Well, value is what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
How we deliver value in this complex environment we will face. So perhaps, first question, given the increased uncertainty in the macro environment we face in, and we talked about some of that this morning, legislation, financial regulation, vulnerability, cost of living issues post-COVID, how should FS companies go about building and future-proofing their customer strategies?
Yeah, it's we have a number of FS people here today, but I think the first thing that I would encourage all of you, and I think it was actually Ian Humphreys who may have said this. I could be wrong. I know he's sitting right there at the booth. Hey, Ian. And I think you said it, where you said, don't just look within financial services. Really take a macro lens outside of financial services, and actually outside of your, not only financial services, but outside of your jurisdiction. I mean, Andrew's here. He's from the UK. We take many of our cues from what's happening in the UK and in other jurisdictions because they tend to be leaders in various arenas relative to Canada. And if you look at it, there's definitely like an intersectionality that's happening even across industries. Financial services no longer resides just within banking. It resides within, I'd say, retailers, but that's an obvious one because you get financing involved and payments involved in that one. But it's also in the what you would traditionally refer to as the automobile space, or now referred to as the mobility and transport industry. You look at it within the utility space, and you really need to understand what's unpacking within those industries. I'll give you guys a simple example. If you were to look at media 20 years ago, many of the media conglomerates were just kind of doing the same old, same old. They were not aware of how big tech was going to ultimately disrupt their behavior and how their business models ran. And if you now apply that to FS, we could actually take the same lessons. It's like, we're not so different from the media conglomerates. We actually are in a very similar position where we stand to be disrupted within FS. And so understanding how the macro trends are unfolding within those industries and actually making those connections across those industries. I know this is supposed to be more of a tactical session, so I'll give you guys a tactical kind of example of how I do that while I was at Interac. It's really simple, but really understanding who your stakeholders are within the ecosystem and actually doing tabletop exercises with them. So at Interac, the stakeholders range from, yes, the big FIs and the credit unions and the smaller FIs and the fintechs. That's the normal kind of participants that you usually work with. But then don't forget, you also want to get in front of the consumers. And from an Interac perspective, I was telling Andrew, we actually don't interact directly. Everybody knows who Interac is because we have a pretty prominent brand, but not very many people know what we actually do because we don't interface directly with those consumers. It's the banks and the fintechs that directly interface with those consumers. So we tend to be one step removed. And so making sure that you still work with your participants like the banks and the fintechs to get in front of your customers, to understand what their pains and their pleasures are. And I'm just going from one side of the spectrum to the other, but you also get, the regulators, the government, and all three levels of government, because if you think about it from a privacy perspective nowadays, it's kind of all over the place, and you got to deal with all three levels of the government. You got to deal with usually advisory kind of committees, consumer advocacy groups, merchant advocacy groups. So really, there's a lot of think tanks that have also been born as of late. The other one is, I would say, academia in a traditional and not so traditional sense. But I would encourage you to get these stakeholder groups together, and don't even just do it within, don't just get the board and the management involved, get the frontline staff involved, get the people that are actually using the services involved, and do these tabletop exercises to understand what their pains and their pleasures are, and what are the macro trends that they're seeing, not seeing, so that you can pull together these intersections.
So that ecosystem, I guess, in
Yep.
terms of we all play different roles in an ecosystem. How do you ensure we align interest and understanding across ecosystems so we really deliver, great outcomes to customers, right?
Absolutely. And for an organization like Interac, or even for some of the larger banks and credit unions, you know what your values or your ethos are within your organization. And so understanding what yours are relative to that ecosystem and then marrying those two up, sometimes not so easy. There's definitely some hurdles, and buy-in and socialization in advance always goes a long way, that one-on-one. I cannot place enough emphasis around building those relationships to get that buy-in. So even if you want your customer experience to land well and the user experience to land well, make sure you're, eliciting the feedback. And actually, when you elicit the feedback, implement the feedback as well.
Let's dig a bit deeper. I think you mentioned learning from other adjacent industries, and I think that's really important because we heard from other sessions that customers are dealing with lots of different brands in their life, and their expectations are shaped by the everyday brands they touch and use. So what are the major trends you see facing financial services players, given what's happening in that environment and the brands they're dealing with, that will have the biggest impact for leaders in the FS space?
Yeah, so I'll touch on a few, and then Andrew, maybe once I'm done, I'd like to hear perspective, because, like I said, these guys tend to lead in the UK versus us in Canada, but a few that come to mind. One is regulation. Lots and lots of regulation that's unfolding here in Canada. And, sometimes people look at it as a negative thing. I actually think it's a sign of progress for us here in Canada. Regulation tends to kind of almost be the catchers when things are kind of unfolding, and then try to react or respond to things. I think with open banking going through its second reading here in Canada, I think that's looking fairly optimistic. Also, the RPAA, that going through the motions right now, I think that also will open up things for the fintechs who are going to have the capacity to directly clear and settle. These are all good things. And then from bringing it back to CX, these actually spur a tremendous amount of wonderful experiences, and I know there's a lot of challenger banks in the UK and other fintechs that have, seen the fruits of that labor kind of unfold.
Yeah, I would say the big recent change in the UK environment, which I'll talk about tomorrow, is the FCA have brought in something called Consumer Duty, which is a really breakthrough piece of legislation, which is really about how do we really understand foreseeable harm of customers? How do we evidence properly that we're delivering great customer outcomes? It's very much a principles-based approach. The way I've seen that is utilize that not just as a something we have to tick the box around delivering to a new regulation, but how to embrace that to build a culture, a customer centricity, so you can really differentiate yourself and stand out. And that's exactly, I think, what we're seeing in terms of some of the challenger banks. So they really are, making huge steps to design and deliver consistent experiences, which really embracing that legislation, the way to actually stand out, differentiate, and grow their brands versus the incumbents in the marketplace. So, I see this as an opportunity rather than a threat, really, in terms of the environment and how people can use that positively rather than negatively.
100%, and it even spurred a second theme that you asked me about themes and trends would be embedded finance. It is exactly why many of the fintechs are being born, because they're kind of, well, like it says, it's like, how do you envelope the financial kind of services that are typically separate and outside of traditional streams, whether it's retail or other, but how does that get embedded? And through that, a lot of fintechs are being born that are providing services that meet our needs, because they understand what those pains are that we are experiencing, and it's actually spurring a tremendous amount of competition. It's spurring a tremendous amount of options for us as consumers, which is all win-win-win. And you guys are seeing that firsthand in the UK as well. I'm going to add a third one that I'm seeing, and I actually haven't quite unpacked this. But as a product person, you typically go and you say, okay, what are the various personas? And let's try and get a single view of the person and their persona so that we can get and fulfill their needs as best as we can. Another thing I heard this morning was, let's create personalized. I think it was you that said that. Let's create personalized views. And it's like, no, it's actually not personalized. They're more customized, because you'll never get that kind of insight and one-on-one with the user. The challenge, and I don't know if all of you experience this, but I'm definitely seeing this. I'm seeing this through some of the data, but I'm also seeing this through my own lived experiences. I have multiple personas. I don't have one persona, and I don't want anybody to have visibility into having all my multiple personas. I sound like a little bit like, there's multiple versions of me, and I'm still my authentic self, but the person that I'm showing up as today is very different than the person I am when I'm on Instagram or TikTok. I'm not on any of those. I am, but I don't actually post. But I even think about my kids, right? They are multiple personas. And so when we're trying to unpack and figure out how you provide those customized experiences, leverage AI, I think that's a key theme that hasn't quite been unpacked yet. That there is no one single persona that's going to fit all in terms of an individual.
We're going to switch on your pack.
Okay. Well, where is it? This fits on my pack, apparently. It sounds very... Okay. All right. My pack is switched, apparently. But, I think in terms of that, if we look at vulnerability even, we haven't practiced this topic. It's an interesting perspective, though. I could be vulnerable one day and not vulnerable the next, right? Yep. I could want different things one day and want different things because my lifestyle's changed.
Yeah.
My life has changed completely. So how do we ensure we adapt to those ever-changing needs as an FS player to make sure I meet those needs and goals of a consumer?
Yeah, there's some givens, right? I think we're all here in FS, and hopefully some of you have a product background, but you know the P's. You got to make sure your product is like on point. It's innovative, it's seamlessly integrated with technology, it meets all those, and that's like a table stake. You got to make sure your price is competitive, all those P's that you typically go through, make sure you're all good, okay? But then if you want to be able to ensure that you're understanding how the market is unfolding, who's vulnerable, who's not vulnerable, what their needs are, you need to make sure what your values are as an organization and how are you showing up. And I'm not talking about the let me give my $100,000 sponsorship, blah, 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 to X company, and then I'll plaster it all over social media, and we've done good, and we're good here. I'm not talking about that at all. What I'm talking about is actually from a community perspective, what are the communities that you truly are creating that's supporting your values and your belief system, that is aligned with your vision and your strategy as an organization? I'll give you a few examples. We work very closely with the immigrants that come into Canada because financial literacy and understanding how to navigate the financial services space can be quite challenging. So, at Interac, for example, it's like, using your own money is really important and core to our business. And so it's like, naturally, that's going to be a space that we service. The other areas around education, financial literacy is also very key to who we are and what we do. Not everybody's on the same page, but also students today don't learn very much of that. Like high school students, elementary school students don't learn very much of that. So we do things with the TDSB here in Toronto on how we can advocate for financial literacy at a very young age. I can tell you, I have a 13-year-old kid, and she knows what compound interest is. I don't think I knew what compound interest was at that age. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad that these services are now becoming available. So community is key, education is key, and then making sure, you show up as your authentic self as an individual and as the company you represent. More and more we're seeing, and it's not quite tied to customer experience, but it's about the employee experience. And making sure that, people, when they join our organizations, they understand who we are, they're invested in what we do, and actually it's aligned with what their values, so that they, in essence, also become advocates for your brand because they are living and breathing what you're doing, and that actually also builds the organizational culture that drives what you're trying to accomplish.
You touched on this earlier on in terms of we need to look outside our window of financial services, beyond that, to adjacent sectors, other jurisdictions. What are the things you think we can learn from other industries and sectors which you think are most applicable for financial services players looking to navigate this VUCA world?
Yeah, I think I talked about the media space. I think there's a lot of learning to be done there. I think in emerging technology, I think we can all in FS feel them, nipping at our heels. They're all entering our space. And instead of seeing them, and, especially in Canada, where we've got a few big players and, a number of smaller ones, we're always trying to figure out how we can compete against each other. I think we need to take a cue from some of these big players.
Yeah.
And actually think of how we can actually collectively come together as opposed to nitpicking at each other and combat some of what they're trying to get at. So when you're working with the likes of, the big tech organizations, ultimately they're the ones that we are enabling them as consumers by buying from them, by using their systems, by facilitating all these services, equipping them with further data. We need to start to use, and I don't know if you've heard that saying, drink your own champagne. We need to start doing a little bit more of that and supporting each other and figuring out, okay, I'm going to work with this organization for this kind of service and that organization for this kind of service. And I think some of the regulation that's coming into place will help facilitate that need as well.
Yeah, and I think obviously a lot of the sessions this morning focused on tech,
yeah,
generative AI, but I always talk about human-to-human experience, right? Ultimately, it's a human, directly to a human, and how we enable better human experiences. So, my question would be about how we properly embrace the opportunity from AI and generative AI as part of delivering that total experience to customers.
Yeah, I think many of you would have seen, I think there's like a new press release every few days now from all of the big, large banks in Canada. TD was trialing it out with mortgage, and I think some of their development pipeline, CIBC as well. I can't remember which one was hiring like 200 plus data and AI specialists. So what I'm seeing from a lot of them is, which is not surprising for the Canadian ecosystem. We tend to be a fairly risk-averse culture, especially the big banks. And so where those investments are being made in those types of use cases, it's like, let's figure out how we can create some operational efficiency. Let's figure out how we can actually reduce our costs. Let's figure out how we can take that and like reinvest it in new areas of opportunity. So I think because this is all still fairly new, that's the safe route. It's like, let's take a defensive play to cut costs, to create efficiencies. But I think with the investments that are being made in hiring of staff, and the types of staff that they're looking to hire, I think that'll soon change to be more of an offensive play. This is my I don't know, looking in my crystal ball, that's what I see happening. And so that's where most organizations currently are focused. And it's going to be a bit of a learning curve and a bit of a journey until they get to that point. But I think all the right moves are being made. And for organizations like the big banks to make those investments right now, I think those are all good signs.
You know, I think just to build on that, I think it's also about how we build capability in organizations
Yeah.
to utilize those things correctly and still get the basics right, because, you know, better insight, better data without action and accountability for action, you know, doesn't change anything, right?
Yeah.
So the reality for me, you know, the basics, fundamentals still have to be there, you know, whilst we embrace technology and what that can bring to the table, right?
Yeah, the change management is huge. We cannot discount the fact that many are probably thinking this is being done, you know, AI is being done to me. I may be displaced and not have a job. And then, you know, whenever people have said this to me, I kind of say, you know, Copilot is called Copilot for a reason. It's not piloting on its own. It's there with a human being working with it to actually figure out how to deliver a service or a capability. And that'll be a bit of a journey that we all have to go through. And we need to remember that there's, you know, your employee base, your customer base, everybody's a little afraid. We don't have all the privacy regulations in place today. We don't have all the AI regulations in place today. Again, to my earlier point, regulation tends to come a little bit afterward and we react to it. But that's not to say we shouldn't trial it out. And so I think this is just a more conservative way of trialing it out. But the impact of things going wrong would be quite significant. And so at least we're moving things in the right direction.
Yeah, let's open up to one or two questions. Then we've got a bit of time. You know, has anybody got any points that you wanted to explore with Cash?
I answered all of your questions.
Yeah.
Andrew also did such a good job. There's no questions.
Yeah, so you now have got to go away with a plan for maximizing market share in a VUCA world, because you've got all the answers. Is that what I hear? Yeah. No, well, I think we've got a couple of, you know, just if you know, as in terms of a plan, you know, tips and recommendations. So people leaving here today, what would be the one or two things you would say to them they should really embrace and think about in terms of plan their own strategies to operate in this world?
Yeah, you need to firstly embed that voice of the customer and that cycle of feedback really into your DNA as an organization. And you need to do it across industries, and you need to do it across stakeholders, and you need to do it across all levels within those groups. And that feedback cycle will really become part of how it informs your vision and also becomes that cornerstone as part of your strategy development and delivery.
I agree. I think listening is fine, but for me, it's more important. I always talk about listen, learn, and act, right?
Yeah.
So listen, great. Learn from what you're listening to, and make sure you've got the ingredients to actually act and drive action and improvement, and a culture of that in your organization. Any final questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap the session up. So listen, thanks for your attentiveness. Thanks, Cash.
Yeah.
You know, for the conversation.
This is good.
Sorry about the stool movement and moving things around, but we got there in the end, so really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I appreciate it too. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Give
Andrew.
a big
Thanks,
hand.
guys.